Hey guys, now that we are officially in the month of October, we'll be taking a look at the 2022 governor elections because they're really becoming even more competitive than the Senate elections, and so we have a lot of highly competitive races to cover today. We'll be going over the latest polls in every single one of these 14 toss-up elections, and then I will give my personal analysis as to how these races are going to go in just 38 days. The midterms really are fast approaching. I'll be making my predictions very soon, but today we'll be focusing on the 2022 governor's map, specifically in the most competitive races of the year. And so we're going to start off with the races on the western half of the U.S. and then move on to the Midwest. Here we have 4 blue wall states, all of them with very competitive races to watch, especially in Wisconsin. And then we're going to go into Maine and then the 2 races in Georgia and Florida. So starting off with Oregon, we really do have a very surprising race here. This is the only major 3-way race of the year, and that is between Tina Kotek, Christine Drazan, and Betsy Johnson. Kate Brown is the incoming governor who was reelected in 2018, but she really was not a popular governor at all. She barely won her re-election in 2018, only winning 50% of the vote in a year that was very favorable to Democrats 2018. And so in 2022, Tina Kotek is a very Kate Brown-like candidate, and she is being challenged by Christine Drazan and Betsy Johnson, who is running as an independent and was a former Democrat. So she really is taking a lot of the liberal vote. If you look at the polling for the Oregon election, Christine Drazan has actually taken the lead by 0.2% as Betsy Johnson begins to tank. Many of the polls between Christine Drazan and Tina Kotek show Drazan actually in the lead. In fact, Tina Kotek has only led in one poll throughout the entirety of the campaign season. Now, in the end, I do still believe that Tina Kotek is going to win, but this race is definitely going to be a lot more competitive than it should be, and it really shows that these very establishment Democrats are not performing well in Oregon, especially after 6 years of Kate Brown. So Oregon is only going to be a lean Democratic state. The pollsters that have been polling this race really aren't the best, and so I do still expect Tina Kotek to outperform expectations. Next up, we have one of the 4 most competitive races of the year. I have 4 races that I think are going to be closer than all of the other ones, and these are the races in Nevada, Arizona, Kansas, and Wisconsin. And so Nevada is going to be the first of those races that we're going to go over today. And here in Nevada, Steve Sisolak is running for re-election against Joe Lombardo, and he leads by 1.2% in the polls. Now, I think that Steve Sisolak will outperform Catherine Cortez Masto, who is running for re-election in the Senate against Adam Laxalt. I think that Adam Laxalt, there's a chance that he wins, but Steve Sisolak also wins re-election to a second term as governor of the Silver State. Polling for Sisolak, though, hasn't been the best lately. However, he did outperform expectations in 2018 when he ran against Adam Laxalt at the time to win his first term, and so now against Joe Lombardo, Steve Sisolak I still have as just barely the favored candidate. I'm going to have Nevada as a tilt Democratic state, simply because most governors do win their re-elections, and being the incumbent governor does give you some pretty significant advantages. So even though I think Nevada is going to be very close, right now I still have Sisolak as the favored candidate, but on the Senate level, I really think the race could very well go both ways, and I do think that split ticketing will be a major thing here. And on top of that, voters in Nevada are allowed to vote for no candidate at all, and so that will play a role in this election. And so I think that right now Steve Sisolak is still very barely the favored candidate as he attempts to win a second term in office. And before we continue, make sure to join my Discord server if you haven't, the link to which is at the very top of the description below. We have 2022 midterm coverage as well as a mock government, which has been going on continuously for 2 years now. We have elections basically every single week, and you can vote with our specialized bot. And so we really do have a lot to offer on our Discord server, so make sure to join that at the very top of the description below. And of course, we'll be covering the midterms basically every single day until the election on the 8th of November. And now moving on to the second of the 4 most competitive races of the year, we have the election in Arizona between Katie Hobbs and Kari Lake. You know, Kari Lake looked like she was going to be a very weak Republican opponent to Katie Hobbs, and she really is. Kari Lake is not performing nearly as well as she should be. This was a race that Republicans won by 14 points in 2018 when Doug Ducey sought a second term in office, but now Katie Hobbs is giving Kari Lake a run for her money. She actually leads in the polls but she is now up by the smallest margin throughout the entirety of the campaign. Hobbs is only leading by 0.5%. The polling is starting to improve here for Kari Lake. Many polls, including Marist College and the Trafalgar Group, have all shown Kari Lake winning this election. Trafalgar having Lake up by 4% is still pretty significant, even though Trafalgar does tend to almost always favor Republicans. This 4-point margin, I think, will translate to Kari Lake having a very slight advantage. And so right now, I have the governor election in Arizona as being tilted for the Republicans. It really will be difficult to flip a governorship currently held by the GOP, and so that's why I do have this race as being tilted for them. Democrats are going to be very competitive in this race still, but as of right now, I do see Kari Lake as slightly the favored candidate as she attempts to succeed Doug Ducey. And so 538 has had these three races as very competitive as well. Oregon and Arizona, in fact, are both toss-up races, with Tina Kotek having a 56% chance at winning and Katie Hobbs having a 52% chance at winning, while in Nevada, Steve Sisolak does have a slightly larger advantage with a 63% chance at winning his second term. And so now we're going to move on to a race that's slightly less competitive, and that is the gubernatorial election in New Mexico between Michelle Lujan Grisham and Mark Ronchetti. 4 years ago, Lujan Grisham easily won her first term, winning by 14.4%. Now she is in a much tougher challenge, as Michelle Lujan Grisham is running against Mark Ronchetti, who is a candidate that made the 2020 Senate election very competitive in the state against Ben Ray Lujan. The Senate election 2 years ago was significantly closer than the presidential election, and Michelle Lujan Grisham is one of the most unpopular governors in the country. She has sexual misconduct allegations against her, and she really just isn't performing well, and so that's why this race is going to be a lot closer than the race 4 years ago. But Michelle Lujan Grisham only leads by 6.1% in the polls, and so right now, with Ronchetti as Republican candidate, he is significantly more moderate than many other GOP nominees. He is not part of the MAGA movement, and so in a state like New Mexico that's moving more and more to the left, I think Ronchetti does stand a chance at making this race very, very close, and so that's why I have New Mexico currently as a lean Democratic state. I think Lujan Grisham is still almost guaranteed to win her re-election, but just not by the margin she would like to win by, and 530 currently gives her an 87% chance at winning her re-election. Now we have the third of the four most competitive governor elections, and that, of course, is the race in Kansas, where we have a Democrat running for re-election in one of the most Republican states in the country. Trump won Kansas by 15 points in 2020 and by 20 points in 2016. And so in 2018, Laura Kelly was elected the governor of Kansas over Chris Kobach by 5%, and this was a major win for the Democratic Party, and now she is seeking a second term in office against Derek Schmidt. Now, if she went against Schmidt in 2018, I think Schmidt still would have came out as the governor, but now that Laura Kelly is the incumbent, and she's been doing pretty well, she's popular in her state, and with abortion becoming a larger and larger issue, I think that Laura Kelly does stand a very good chance at winning a second term. 538 actually gives her a 66% chance at winning her re-election this year. Her odds have only been going up in the last couple of months, and so I really do think that Laura Kelly is in a favorable position going into the race in November. She's actually up in the two latest polls by Emerson College and Echelon Insights by 2 and 12%. I think the Emerson poll is the one to note here. Emerson College is an A-minus rated pollster and isn't really known for being too biased in any certain direction, and so them having Kelly up by 2 really signals to me that Laura Kelly does stand a chance in this race. For quite a while, I had Kansas as a lean to tilt Republican state, but I am going to move it into the tilt Democratic column. I think Laura Kelly is a strong incumbent, and incumbents, even in states that don't favor their party at all, can win second terms. We've seen that in states like Maryland and Massachusetts in the past. In 2018, Larry Hogan and Charlie Baker were both re-elected pretty easily, and so even though I think Laura Kelly is going to face a significantly tougher uphill battle, she does have a very good chance still at winning re-election. Next up, the final race in the western half of the continental U.S., we have the election in Texas between Beto O'Rourke and Greg Abbott. Greg Abbott is now running for his third term in office, as there are no gubernatorial term limits. And so we just saw a debate between the two candidates. It really wasn't too notable, but really Greg Abbott is still in a favorable position. But I do think we're going to see the most competitive governor election in Texas in the last couple of years. The last time we saw a race this close is probably 1992 when George W. Bush was first elected governor of the state. And so Greg Abbott here is up by 7.3% in the polls. Beto O'Rourke is at 43%. Abbott is at a majority right now, and if you do look at the most recent polls, Greg Abbott is still doing pretty well. We're not seeing too many signs of this race becoming significantly more competitive, even though at one point Abbott was up by double digits. But O'Rourke has a big fundraising as well as grassroots campaign going. He has, I believe, almost 100,000 volunteers, the largest of any political movement in the country right now, but that probably isn't going to be enough. 2022 is not going to be the year in which Texas flipped. It did not flip in 2020. It wasn't even close to flipping in 2020, and so in 2022, I think that Beto O'Rourke will lose by a larger margin than Joe Biden in Texas, making Texas a likely Republican state. Even though this is still a major race, it's in Texas, it's going to be one of those races to watch. And now in the state of Alaska, we are seeing this election become increasingly competitive as Mike Dunleavy seeks a second term in office with both Les Gara and Bill Walker as his challengers. Les Gara is the Democratic nominee, while Bill Walker is the former governor that was elected in 2014 and then did not run for re-election in 2018, and so that's when Mike Dunleavy won his first term. And now the latest polls show Mike Dunleavy really not performing too well against both Les Gara or Bill Walker. Remember, Alaska should be a solid Republican state, but their losses this year, especially in that House election, have proven that Alaska may be more competitive than you think. And so in the most recent poll, Bill Walker is down by 4 points in a head-to-head matchup against Mike Dunleavy. And so yes, Alaska will be using ranked choice voting, but basically what this means is that in the final round, Walker will get 48% of votes. And then in the election between Les Gara and Mike Dunleavy, so this would be if Les Gara came in as a second place candidate, Mike Dunleavy would win by an even larger margin of 7%. So right now, things are still looking good for Dunleavy, but if you look at the previous poll that was released, Mike Dunleavy actually led by 18 points head-to-head against Les Gara, so we may be seeing this race become closer. And the House election, Mary Peltola, the recently elected Democratic House member to serve the at-large district of Alaska, is now leading by double digits against both Nick Begich and Sarah Palin as she attempts to win her first full term this November as well. So in Alaska, I'm going to have it as likely Republican. I think that in the end, Mike Dunleavy is still going to win, but Bill Walker and Les Gara both as the candidates in this race is going to make this election pretty exciting, and right now 538 gives Dunleavy an 83% chance at winning. And now we're going to move into the Midwest, specifically the upper Midwest, the most competitive region in the country. We have 4 major races going from Minnesota all the way to Pennsylvania. So in Minnesota, Tim Walz is running for re-election. Scott Jensen is the Republican challenger. And right now, 538 gives Tim Walz a 94% chance at winning re-election. That's really all you have to know. He won by 11 points in 2018 and is currently up in the polls by 9.6%. Tim Walz really is in a very good position, and I definitely see him winning by over a 5% margin, and that's why I have Minnesota currently as a likely Democratic state. This race is not going to be close at all, but still Minnesota is a competitive state, and so the race here will still be one to watch, but I think that out of all 3 of the races remaining, Minnesota is going to be the least competitive of the 4. However, we do have the most competitive of the 4 in Wisconsin, where Tony Evers is seeking a second term in office. No Democrat running for governor in Wisconsin has ever won with a Democratic president in the White House since 1962, when JFK was still the U.S. president. So Tony Evers is going to face a very tough uphill battle against Tim Michels. Tim Michels is a pretty moderate Republican, somebody that really isn't too affiliated with Donald Trump, and so he currently is only down in the polls by 0.7%. This race is becoming increasingly competitive, at least according to the polls. We saw 3 polls, all showing Tim Michels leading over Tony Evers, but right now I'm still pretty confident that Tony Evers is the one with the advantage. This race is still going to be very, very close, and Tony Evers is not doing as well as he was doing in the polls in 2018, but you have to consider the fact that Tony Evers is the incumbent governor, somebody who is relatively popular, and Trafalgar having Michels up by 1 basically means that Tony Evers is in the lead. So the race in Wisconsin is going to be hyper competitive, but right now I still have Tony Evers as the favored candidate. I think that it's going to be very, very close, and so in the 4th of the 4 most competitive races, I have it as being tilted Democratic alongside Kansas and Nevada. I think these 3 races right now could easily go both ways, but I still have the Democratic incumbents favored, and so this will give Democrats their 21st governorship. 538 right now gives Tony Evers a 60% chance at winning, so the race here is getting closer according to their forecast as well, as at one point Tony Evers actually had an 80% chance at winning a second term. So we're definitely going to have to watch Wisconsin as they elect their governor, whether it's going to be Tony Evers or Tim Michels. That's still in question, but Wisconsin, no matter what, is going to be one of the closest gubernatorial elections of the year. Next up, in Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer is running away with this race against Tudor Dixon. For a while, Whitmer looked like she may be in trouble, as James Craig was about to win the Republican nomination, but he was disqualified a couple of months before, so Tudor Dixon did eventually win the primary, and she is a horrible candidate. She has terrible views on abortion, especially as a woman, and so Gretchen Whitmer currently leads by double digits in the polls, 11.6%. I don't think she's going to win by that much. She only won by 9 points in 2018. I think that she's probably going to win by around 8 to 9%. Even the Trafalgar group has her up by 6 points, and so Gretchen Whitmer really is doing very, very well right now in this election. Tudor Dixon does not stand a chance. I mean, some people are saying that Tudor Dixon might actually win, and I think that's just a complete joke. Whitmer has been leading by such a large margin for so long that it would be almost impossible for Tudor Dixon to turn this around. In fact, 538 gives Gretchen Whitmer a 96% chance of winning. I don't think she has quite a 96% chance of winning, but still, she is heavily favored in this election. And so Michigan and Minnesota are going to be the two most solid states for Democrats in the Midwest, although I still right now believe that Minnesota is going to vote to the left of Michigan. It's just more blue of a state. By default, Biden won Minnesota by 7 points. Michigan only went to him by 3 points. And finally, in Pennsylvania, Doug Mastriano is just proving to be so terrible of a Republican nominee that I'm going to move the state for the first time into the likely Democratic column, the Keystone State on the gubernatorial level I have as being likely. And this is because if you look at the latest Senate polls, the margin between Fetterman and Oz really is starting to close, but on the gubernatorial level, Josh Shapiro still maintains a double-digit lead, and it's been pretty solid for quite a while. Doug Mastriano is the worst Republican nominee this year for any gubernatorial election. He's not even getting support from the Republican Governors Association or many current and former Republican lawmakers in the Keystone State. So Josh Shapiro leading by double digits in virtually every single poll. Fox News, Shapiro up 11, Emerson College, Shapiro up 10, Marist College, Shapiro up by 13. The closest poll is from the Trafalgar group, who has Shapiro up by 2, but really, Josh Shapiro is going to destroy Doug Mastriano this year. 538 currently gives him an 80 or 95% chance of winning. So Pennsylvania is actually solid now for the first time. I actually did not know that, because the Senate election is getting closer, as I believe the odds for John Fetterman have dropped to 77%, but on the gubernatorial level, Josh Shapiro at 95% in terms of his chances of winning. There's really no beating him now. Doug Mastriano is going to lose by a pretty large margin. I think double digits is not out of the realm of possibilities, but still I have Pennsylvania as a likely Democratic state, and I currently predict a margin of around 7 to 8%. And now we have just one competitive election in New England, and that is the race in Maine between Janet Mills and Paula Page. Paula Page is a former governor, and he was actually the only person in the Republican Party to file for the GOP nomination. Janet Mills is running as the incumbent Democratic governor, who was elected by 8 points in 2018. And so as a former two-term governor, Paula Page may look like a strong candidate, but he really is not doing well at all, and this can be explained by the fact that he was barely even elected in both 2010 and 2014. In 2010, Paula Page was elected governor with only 38% of the vote, and he barely won that race. It was a four-way race, and vote splitting is what ultimately gave him the victory. And then in 2014, he got lucky once again. It was a three-way race, and Paula Page won re-election with just 48% of the vote. So liberals were really splitting the vote there for the last few Maine elections, but in 2018, Janet Mills did win an outright majority against Moody, and so the race wasn't as competitive as it was before. So in the state of Maine right now, I have Janet Mills winning her re-election by I believe 7 to 8% margin. Janet Mills currently up by 9.3% in the polls. She's been doing pretty well ever since she officially won the Democratic nomination, because before, the race seemed to be pretty close, with Mills only up by 3 and 4 points, but the three most recent polls have all shown Janet Mills leading by double-digit margins, and these three polls were all conducted in the month of September, and Emerson even had Mills up by 11. That's a pretty big deal. So Janet Mills right now is clearly on track to winning her second term in office, and 538 gives her a 93% chance at doing so. And now moving on to Georgia, we only have two races left. We have this race in Georgia and then the one in Florida. So in Georgia, Brian Kemp is running against Stacey Abrams for a second time in a row. He won by 1.4% in 2018. It was a very close race, but this time, Brian Kemp, as the incumbent governor, is probably going to win by a larger margin. He's up by 6.2% in the polls, and even though the Senate election still favors Raphael Warnock over Herschel Walker, Brian Kemp is actually expanding his lead right now against Stacey Abrams. And so the state of Georgia, according to the polls as well as my own prediction, election is going to be likely Republican. I can see Brian Kemp winning by around 5 to 7 points. Stacey Abrams simply isn't performing as well as she was last time, and also the state of Georgia is not as close, mainly because Brian Kemp is the incumbent, as well as the fact that Democrats just aren't in the strong national position that they were in 4 years ago. And so that's why I have Brian Kemp currently as the favored candidate, with him pretty much guaranteed to win a second term. 538 currently gives him an 87% chance at doing so. And finally, in the state of Florida, we have an election between two governors, Ron DeSantis and a former governor, Charlie Crist. Crist was governor of Florida from 2007 until 2011 as a Republican, and of course, Ron DeSantis is the incumbent. And Hurricane Ian may have an impact on this race, how Ron DeSantis deals with the disaster only a month before the election in November. But Ron DeSantis right now is in a pretty safe position. He leads by 5.6% in the polls. Charlie Crist doesn't really stand too much of a chance right now. He did lead in the most recent poll, but that's going to be a clear outlier, with Ron DeSantis leading by pretty significant margins in every single one of these other surveys. He's one of the most popular governors in the country, especially considering how purple of a state Florida is, and despite only winning by 0.4% against Andrew Gillum 4 years ago, Ron DeSantis is in a significantly better position this year as the incumbent and also as the frontrunner for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination. If he wants to become president one day, he is going to have to win re-election this year, and right now it looks like he is going to do so, as I have Florida as a likely Republican state, with Ron DeSantis as the clear favorite. And so this right here is my current 2022 governor's map. 24 governorships for the Democrats right now, 26 for the Republicans, but Democrats are by far going to govern more people after these midterms, and that's really what matters the most here. And so 24, 26, it would still be a net gain of 2 for Democrats after losing Virginia in 2021 to Glenn Youngkin. And so right now, the governor elections are going to be closer than they have ever been. I think Nevada, Arizona, Kansas, and Wisconsin really could go both ways, so we could see Democrats actually lose all 3 of these tilt races, but in my opinion, I think they're going to win at least 1 or 2, and so these governor elections are really starting to tighten up, as we are now just 38 days away, now 37 days actually, away from the governor elections on the 8th of November. So thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure you like it down below if you enjoyed it. Comment down below which party you think will win the more governorships, and do you think Democrats can win 3 out of the 4 most competitive races? Subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and I will see you guys in the next video.